The Pittsburgh Steelers GM search continues as second round of interviews are working their way through. Doug Whaley was added to the list of those guys. We're going to talk about who is going to be the pick, as well as philosophy of how to handle the quarterback position moving forward from a GM standpoint, and how that will play a huge part of this conversation. Joining me today is Josh Taylor of KDKA TV and 93.7 The Fan. It's going to be a fun episode of the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things of the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. Be sure to hit the like button of this video if you enjoy it. Hit the subscribe button to our YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus episodes and our breaking news updates. If you want to help out the show further, go on Apple Podcasts. Leave us a 5-star review with a positive comment. Doing both at the same time gets you a shout out at the end of the show. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day. Joining me today, as I said before, is Josh Taylor of KDKA TV and 93.7 The Fan. Josh, we normally have you on Thursdays. We brought you up again. We had to do some rotation with our crew. We thank you so much for making the adjustment with us, man.
You know me, man. I'm good on short rest. I've been doing that my entire career. So if I got to do it again, let's lock it in and get going, man. I'm excited. Absolutely.
Now, big news that's come out is that former Steelers front office man and former Bills GM Doug Whaley was added to the list of candidates for the Steelers GM search, who will be getting a second interview and for the process, and his interview will happen Wednesday. So that being said, we are interested to see how this progress goes. There's other names out there, but the three big names that I think a lot of Steelers fans are attracted to right now are the guy who's still in house and Brandon Hunt. Well, I guess four big names, because when you throw in Brandon Hunt, you have to have Omar. Then you have Louis Riddick, the guy who's been with the Eagles. He's been on ESPN. He's a Pitt guy. There's definitely history there. You want to see that potential too. And Doug Whaley, a guy who has been the right hand man to Kevin Colbert, went on to become a GM. Didn't have a great time with the Buffalo Bills, but still that experience is something he can learn from. And those are three guys that appear as primary candidates, or four guys again, with throwing Omar Khan into the mix. But Josh, when you're looking at this and you're trying to determine who would be the guy, I still think it's Brandon Hunt and Omar Khan just being pushed up, because that's how the Steelers work. But the Steelers, they could be doing their due diligence here. They could be just kicking the tires. But is there a factor in either Louis Riddick or Doug Whaley or anyone else in their experience that might be like a kicking boost to get them over the top and say, you know what, this is our guy for the foreseeable future. This is the successor to Kevin Colbert?
Yeah, I think there's a couple factors. I think it's the fact that Doug Whaley and Louis Riddick have both worked in NFL front offices previously. Doug Whaley's worked with the Bills, of course. He was with the Steelers previously before he went to Buffalo, and Louis Riddick's been with two other organizations. And I keep hearing the whole, well, he's been out of football for this long. Do we really believe that if they just leave for a while, they just forget how the game works and disappear? Do we really believe that Louis Riddick, having the access that he has through ESPN, just has totally not been in touch with any of the teams in the league on how things are going or how they're doing things? Are we really that naive? Are we really believing this? Are we forgetting that talking is the most primitive form of communication and one of the easiest ways to disseminate information? Did we just lose that train of thought? Or are we trying to psych ourselves out of what we want? These are indisputable things here that we're talking about. Louis Riddick has worked for two other teams. Doug Whaley has worked for the Bills and also worked for the Steelers. Now, here's another thing that you have to bear in mind. Both men are also familiar with how the Steelers front office operates.
Exactly.
That is a very important factor, because we know Omar Khan and Brandon Hunt, they're internal guys. They've been there a while. We know what their body of work is. However, Doug Whaley formerly worked in the Steelers organization. Louis Riddick, not only has he been, at least in proximity to Pittsburgh, having been a Pitt guy. But once again, working at ESPN as an analyst, he has that inside connection, has that access to every team that he wants to have access to. Not to mention the fact he also has a family member that used to work for this organization. So there is some level of familiarity there and some understanding of how the Steelers work. Why is that important? The last time they hired a GM 22 years ago was Kevin Colbert. Yes. He came from the Detroit Lions. Yes. But they also had a level of familiarity with Kevin Colbert. He knew how the Steelers operated. Also, it didn't hurt that he went to North Catholic High School, but that's beside the point. It all comes back around to you have to have, if you're the Steelers, I shouldn't say you have to have, I should say you have had over the previous number of decades, a certain ethos, if you will, that you stick to. And anybody that becomes a part of your organization either has to know that ethos or learn that ethos. But if you're in the front office and you're near the top of that organization, you better know it coming in. You won't have time to learn it. You got to know it. That's why the last guy that was in that seat as GM knew it. That's why the guy that was before that, as far as Tom Donahoe was concerned, knew it. Dan Rooney, during his time period where he was actually acting as the GM of the team decades ago, of course he knew it. I mean, there was not much indoctrination that needed to happen there. But there is that understanding as the lineage goes down, if you will, that you have to have that understanding of what this organization does, how they've done it, and the success that has come from it. And if you're trying to get into that position, you better know that coming in the door. And I think all of these candidates know that in one way or another, not without mentioning the experience that they all have in different functions in this league as well.
That's a big part of this too, is figuring out what their function will, what their functions have been and what they will be. I think one thing that you talk about, and the Steelers mentioned this as a value to them with Brandon Hunt in this conversation, is he does have outside experience. He's been with the Eagles. In fact, the Eagles interviewed him, and they're looking at him as well, as joining their staff again. So I do think that outside experience matters to the Pittsburgh Steelers, but also an understanding of how the inside of the Steelers organization works. I don't think the Steelers and a GM are looking for someone who's going to shake their foundation, something that's going to change the philosophy of how the GM position works or how the front office works. They know their system. Now, staying up to date, maybe modernizing your practices as you go along, that's a different story. I can see that being, part of the process. But as far as coming in and making sweeping changes, this is a boat that is headed in the right direction. They've got 6 Super Bowls. They've consistently been relevant in the NFL. They've drafted well for years. That's not the issue with this team, and that's not what needs to change. Now, could there be some maybe different evaluating skills? Possibly. The Steelers have been great at picking wide receivers. They've been great at picking pass rushers. Maybe if they found a guy who could help them fortify the secondary in the draft, because that's been a position that they haven't been able to add elite talent with through the draft for a little bit of time now. So I get that. And I hear that, but I guess I'm looking at these 3 guys, and I know there's other people that are getting second interviews and all that in the mix, but these are the 3 guys that stand out to me and the guys who I think are really getting looked at closely. But I look at these 3 guys and I still ask myself, if I'm the Steelers and if I'm the Rooneys, if I'm looking at this, and I'm also including Tomlin in this conversation to see who you want to work with, I'm looking at the guys who are going to know how to keep this ship pointed in the same direction, know the ins and outs of the organization, but also have the right philosophies in their brain as far as where the NFL is headed. And we're going to talk about that in the next segment a little bit with where I'm going with this. But the NFL is entering in a new era where the salary cap is booming. It boomed this year. It's going to boom again next year and the year after that. And that's going to take some free thinking and some forward thinking by these offices. And that's something that I kind of think would have been interesting to see how Kevin Colbert would have handled how you pay different players and in the rates and the percentages proportionate to your total salary cap increase over the next coming years. But what does the focus of the Steelers become? That's going to be an interesting question. I want to focus that question on the quarterback position in a little bit here, Josh, because of course they just drafted Kenny Pickett. Well, how they manage Kenny Pickett on a financial side over the next few years, regardless of what direction he goes in, will be very interesting, and I think plays a big part into these conversations that they're having with their second interviewees. So we'll talk about that. But first, We got to talk to you guys about betonline.net. Betonline.net is your number one source for all your sports betting stats and information. You can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs. The NBA playoffs are well underway into round 2, and they're kicking butt. The Stanley Cup playoffs are well underway. The Pittsburgh Penguins just played last night, finishing out for Game 4. We'll see how that continues, but you can make money on that as well as Major League Baseball. All the things available at betonline.net. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action when you visit BetOnline, where the game starts. Back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Josh Taylor of KDKA TV, 93.7 The Fan. We thank you for making us your first listen every day. Now, Josh, as I was talking about in the previous segment, the quarterback position is always a big thing to manage. Now, the Steelers' philosophy with handling Ben Roethlisberger was pay him and keep him as long as you can. And it worked as far as keeping him on the team. They found ways, in the early 2010s, we weren't sure if he'd last long enough to keep getting paid, but they brought in Todd Haley. They made it. They helped him lengthen his career, and they kept paying him. And he was part of the 2010s, even though the 2010s weren't weren't a Super Bowl decade. They weren't a decade where they blew things up. They were still competitive in those years, but towards the end of it, we saw Ben Roethlisberger get injured in 2019, have a strong start to 2020, but then fade off when teams realized the short passing attack. And then in 2021, he just had what was his worst year, his most limited athletic year of his entire career. So at the end of it, you saw it kind of dwindle a little bit. But I even outside of how you pay a quarterback when they're getting older in their career, we're seeing with this booming salary cap, teams and how things are going to have to change with the proportions of how players get paid. Because Patrick Mahomes, who's arguably the biggest named quarterback in the NFL right now, he got paid what people thought a few years ago was an absurd amount of money. But when you start matching it up with the new salary cap and how it's starting to look with the numbers going up and up and up, it's starting to look like the Kansas City Chiefs got a great deal. Those great deals aren't just going to just be hanging around and always available now. Because now agents are going to see this, players are going to see the money that's out there, and that's going to start pushing things. My big question is, what's the philosophy of how to pay and handle quarterbacks moving forward? Because Kenny Pickett, let's say Kenny Pickett's a superstar, and let's see he's everything the Steelers hope for, and he's the guy. How much do you pour into him? Because we've seen teams like the Falcons with Matt Ryan, like the Ravens with Joe Flacco, like how the Vikings are with Kirk Cousins now, even though he wasn't a drafted quarterback. Teams that pay their quarterbacks this huge sum of money, but then hamstring the rest of their roster because they can't add to it. And that
the
being
Packers with Aaron Rodgers is probably the biggest stark example of all of them.
Right there, exactly. And that's where I think the Steelers, they're talking to these guys. I guarantee you, managing quarterbacks into the future is a huge part of this conversation right now that they're having in these backdoor talks of who's going to get the job.
Here's the fun part when we're talking about paying quarterbacks and how it goes up against the salary cap situation. I'm going to point out 3 things that probably should catch people's attention and really give you an idea of where the Steelers are and why you should feel a lot better about this. Number 1, going into this season, Mason Rudolph and Mitchell Trubisky, as of this moment, not counting in the 2 rookies that they just drafted, their 2 combined cap hits at the current moment sit at less than $8 million. Going into next season, Mitchell Trubisky's cap hit, since Mason Rudolph's on the last year of his contract, Mr. Trubisky's cap hit next season is less than $11 million. So we're talking about a situation where the Steelers are paying. This season will be paying 3, and if you want to count the possibility of maybe a 4th quarterback on the practice squad, 4 quarterbacks for a fraction of what a bunch of teams are paying just their starter alone. Mm-hmm. You're going to have the same situation next year and maybe even the next couple years after that, because the one guy who's actually under contract past 2023 is on a rookie contract.
Yep.
So they're getting the best part of all 3 of these guys. They're getting really good early years of their career and development for pennies on the dollar because of what they signed them to in the stage of their careers that they're in. That's one thing you should look at. The next thing you should look at, right now, the Steelers have $12 million in cap space available according to overthecap.com coming into the 2022 season. Going into the 2023 season, and this is estimated, it's estimated at $75 million, and it's maybe only a $5 million bump on the cap. Let's say there's a bigger bump to the cap. Now we're talking about a situation that's even better, if not similar to what they went into going into this past offseason, having even more cap space. And a lot of guys already under contract. That's another thing you should look at as far as paying quarterbacks and why this may be important down the road. And the third thing I'm going to point out, and I think you already alluded to this, the teams that are paying quarterbacks so much right now. We talked about the Packers paying Aaron Rodgers. The Falcons just had to pay 8 figures to trade Matt Ryan. Not to cut him, not for him to retire. They had to pay 8 figures, and I'm not talking like 11, 12 million. I'm talking about significant 8 figures just to send the man to another team. This is what happens when we're talking about paying quarterbacks in late parts of their careers. I'm glad you brought up Ben Roethlisberger, because this is the risk that you take when you're paying quarterbacks that much money, especially this late in their careers. I've been saying this for a while now. The clock started ticking for the Steelers the moment Ben Roethlisberger left that game week 2 against Seattle with that elbow injury, because they knew, hey, wait a minute, he's in his late 30s. He's about to have elbow surgery. This can't be good. We got to start thinking ahead of time now. That's when the clock started of what they needed to do as far as planning for the quarterback position. We didn't want to, I shouldn't say we, but a lot of us didn't want to accept it at the time because we thought Ben would play forever. But the truth of the matter is, when you're a quarterback in your late 30s, you go through elbow surgery, odds are the time is closer to ending than it is to the beginning. That's just the way it is. So all of that said, the Steelers are in a very precarious position because not only can they load up depth at the quarterback position, which they did, they can also get prime years out of the guys that they have loaded up at that position, and they can do it at an absolute fraction of the cost, which also allows them to A, sort out who the guy is that should be in the short term, and B, sort out who the long-term guy is and have plenty of opportunity to figure out what you're going to pay him and how it's going to stack up against the books, because right now they're in such an advantageous position with their quarterback being off the books now as far as the cap's concerned.
That's a big part of this. It's figuring out how to structure your team in this part of it, because again, when the Steelers, when they made their last 2 Super Bowl runs, Ben Roethlisberger was in his rookie contract and just out of his rookie contract, and they were able to be aggressive, load up the roster, fill positions of need, and be able to bring those guys in. Now, while the salary cap's booming, you have that opportunity with Kenny Pickett, especially if he's your guy. Now, again, no one's saying Kenny Pickett is guaranteed to be Ben Roethlisberger or is guaranteed to be the next great Steelers quarterback. But there's the chance that he could be. And that's why they picked him in the first round. And they have confidence in him. And if you're looking at this is your chance to put the building block pieces in place. That's why I think they went and got maybe a Miles Jack, a guy in his mid-20s who could come in. If he can pair up with Devin Bush, the two of them do great, you got your off-ball linebacker pair. That's why you paid TJ Watt all that money to stick around and have him for the majority of his career. And I think that's what they're trying to do when they're going to pay Minkah Fitzpatrick to make him part of that. But I also think the Steelers do need to take a look and find other players to keep it adding out there. James Bradbury being cut by the Giants. Would they make a play at him? That's another discussion we'll have at some point. But they need to find the players who are going to be the pillar players while they're figuring out this quarterback situation. And the big thing for the quarterback to me is don't kill the Steelers while you're developing. And if the quarterback becomes elite, different story, then you're back to it. And something that we've talked about a lot here on this show is how young this offense is. The whole offensive line is in their 20s. Najee Harris, Chase Claypool, Deontay Johnson, George Pickens, Calvin Austin, Pat Freiermuth, Zach Gentry, all those guys. Connor Hayward too, you could throw him in the mix. All those guys are in their mid to early 20s, giving you an opportunity to truly build a unit forward. And as you're doing that, Josh, you're seeing, not everyone's going to be a home run hit. No, not everyone's going to be a complete fit. But if you hit on enough of them, you can then refill your ranks with the draft and through the free agency over the years. And that's rebuilding your offense to the point while you're keeping your defense as an elite group.
This is a really important point I want to toss in here, because you were hitting on something that I've been trying to really hammer home with a lot of people in other discussions. When I was trying to explain the free agent moves that they made, most of those guys got 2-year contracts? I think Chooks might have got 3. but they weren't long-term contracts as far as the guys they brought either in free agency or brought back in the case of Chukwueze Okorafor, in the case of Terrell Edmonds, who, by the way, if we're talking cap hits, is actually his cap hit is less than Justin Wayne, if you can wrap your mind around it. It's really, really crazy. But think about all those guys we're talking about. All of those cap hits are all relatively small, which does two things. Either one, at best, and if this is their best case scenario, it's a really good scenario, which is you get really good production out of them. They help your team become better than the way you want them to be, and you're doing it at dirt cheap. Or worst case, if it doesn't work, within a year, maybe by the end of those contracts, you say, you know what? We can clear the deck. We can clear those books. You save that money, and you're allowed to reload, and it doesn't hurt you to do that because you're not locked into long-term or big money contracts. The way Kevin Colbert really handled this offseason as far as building depth and doing it at a very inexpensive clip, I don't think he gets enough credit for that. That it wasn't really the players that they signed or the positions that they filled. I'm looking at the numbers on the contracts and going, how did he get away with that? How did he get away with bringing in this guy? How did he get away with bringing in that guy? They're only paying him this for this year and that for next year. I think that's the thing that gets overlooked, because you want to talk about GMs doing great jobs and what they've done in the offseason. We got to look more at that, because the way they brought in so many guys to fill up positions that not only find starters, but they also established depth too, and did it in a very inexpensive fashion. Now, if you want to talk about the offensive tackle position and the running back position, I'll listen to that, because is it quality depth? That remains to be seen. Is there enough quality depth at corner? That also remains to be seen. But there's another thing we're throwing out there. There's still a little bit of cap space left, even though they haven't signed all their rookies yet. They still may be able to bring in a guy or two that may be a June 1st cap casualty in the next month or two. They can still restructure a couple of guys who have bigger cap hits on this team. If they find a guy that's worth bringing in, that can still add to that depth. So they still have a ton of options to still maybe patch up a few things or cross a couple T's and dot a couple I's if need be. This is really, not only are they in a really good position now, but they may not be finished yet, and it's not the worst thing in the world.
Exactly. And this is part of why Kevin Colbert always believed in keeping that cap money available and not spending it all the way, because you never know when JoeHayden might get cut. Also, JoeHayden did release a video on Instagram that's basically like he's moving out of Pittsburgh. So that's pretty much done, which so even those who might be right, salute to him. He did a great job with his time in Pittsburgh. It was a shame they couldn't get him a playoff win, but I mean, that guy fought, that guy battled. He was a heck of a leader for the team and a great person to talk to. Every time you got a chance to talk to JoeHayden in the locker room, you knew you were going to get some great answers and some great insight from a true professional. So salute to him. Agreed. But in talking about this, they would have never gotten him if they would have been a team that spent all their cap, or at least most and left themselves with not a lot of wiggle room at the going into training camp. And that could be a situation that they're looking at now, like James Bradbury. He's a Pro Bowl cornerback. Is he a guy that you want to throw into the mix? That's an interesting question. Would that be something that you could do? I think it'd be something to at least consider if you can get around the time. Now, the thing is, James Bradbury was just getting paid a contract. Was about to get paid a contract that was going to be worth a $21 million cap hit this year. You ain't paying that kind of money for him. But as far as finding it work, this is where I think the Steelers could make a move, and it could be cornerback, it could be offensive line. There could be you never know who could get let go because of a money crunch or something else that's going on. So back to my original point here, all these other factors, these other positions, the position groups, putting these things together, they all spin off of trying how you're going to manage the quarterback situation. And I truly believe the Pittsburgh Steelers, it will be similar. Like if Kenny Pickett's a franchise quarterback, they're going to do everything they can to keep him in the fold. But I wonder if they're looking at this and they're going to find a way to say, hey, Kenny, we know that you're doing great things here, but what if we didn't make you the highest paid quarterback at the time when his contract is up, and if he's played to that level? I'm not saying that he will. I'm not guaranteeing that he will, but if he's played to that level, what if we say, hey, we'll put you in this range, but we're doing this to keep around, say, George Pickens or whoever else, and build that way. I think that finding ways to do that, having that in your bank of philosophy, as well as other things like Kevin Colbert's practices, will play a huge part in who ends up winning the job. Again, my money is still on Brandon Hunt and Omar Khan just kind of being moved up together. But Josh, what's your point before we head to our next break?
I could think of one organization that did that quite a bit as far as their quarterback maybe taking a pay cut to bring some other guys in, and it worked out pretty well for him as far as keeping that guy long term. I'm just throwing it out there.
Just
Tom
put it
Brady
out
took
there
a lot of pay cuts.
for all the people who might be thinking, who's he talking about? Just
I mean, because there are a lot of people that say, "Oh, well, Ben should come back." He's almost 40 because Brady's back at 44. Well, the Steelers maybe should be considerate of try to approach the quarterback like you mentioned in said discussion with, "Hey, are you okay with not making a ton of money or taking a pay cut?" When Tom Brady took pay cuts a lot for the Patriots. So if we're going to play one side, play the other side too.
I agree with that, and Tom, I mean, that was a huge factor to a lot of those teams over the years with the Patriots. Was Tom Brady was not in the highest paid club, and he took.
And there were a lot of years where the Patriots did not spend to the cap. There was a year they won a Super Bowl and they had the fourth most cap space entering the offseason. So keep that in mind also.
So a lot of things to factor in there. But again, we will keep you up to date on the GM search. Who knows? I still see this ending in a couple of weeks or a month or so. I think that they're going to try. Well, it might even drag it a little bit longer. I think the biggest thing is they're going to want this to conclude maybe a month before all the summer camps, or a few weeks before at least the summer camps for college football start, because that's when you want to have your full staff in place. Everyone knows each other. Everyone's ready to hit the ground running. And then your scouts are going out collecting information, and you start building your profiles on all the prospects who might be available this year. So exactly. We'll keep you up to date on that situation. But I have a question from a caller, from a listener, who will get on in the next part of the show, talking about another part of the offense. We'll address that in just a minute here. But first, we got to talk to you guys about rockauto.com. Y'all know you go to rockauto.com to save time and money when you need help finding parts for your car, your truck. You can end up spending 30%, 50%, even 100% more on the same parts from a chain store or car dealership. For example, if you go to the chain store or the car dealership, a Honda Odyssey fuel pump can run you around $353. But if you go to rockauto.com, it's $216. You're just saving yourself a lot of money, and you're doing it from the comfort of your own home on your own computer. So go to rockauto.com. It's a family-owned business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years, and Rock Auto's prices are reliably low for every customer. They have everything that you could need, from brake parts to tail lamps to motor oil and even new carpet. Go explore their easy-to-use website today and find the solution for your auto part needs by visiting rockauto.com right now, and you'll see all the parts available. And when you do so, be sure to write Locked On in there. How did you hear about us, Bucks, so that they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliable low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com today. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm Chris Carter. He's Josh Taylor. Josh, we've done a lot of talking about the quarterback position, and we've talked about this, but we've talked about this before. But I want to touch back up on the running back position, because they still have Najee Harris, and Najee Harris is clearly going to be a major part, and maybe even the focusing point of this offense in the coming year. But the Steelers still could use help in the backfield, in my opinion. But there's some that still question, what about Benny Snell? We have our caller, KP from Warsaw, Indiana, who asked this question about Benny Snell.
Hey, Chris, KP here from Warsaw, Indiana. Hey, my question is about Benny Snell. With the worst offensive line in football, do you really feel like he got a fair shot at the backup role? He had a couple decent runs there at the end of the season. But, like I said, with the worst line in football, do you look for more from him, or you think he just needs to be replaced? Just wondering your thoughts. Keep up the good work. Thank you. Bye.
Thank KP for your call. Always appreciate callers to call into the show and give us your thoughts. And just to let y'all know, if you're international and you need to call the show, remember, you can send an email to losteelerstopicbag@gmail.com. Again, that's losteelerstopicbag at gmail.com. If you want to send in, just send in, make sure you have your name, where you're from, and include an audio file of what you're saying there. If you want to call into the show, it's 412-223-6644. You can call at any time. You'll leave a voicemail, and then again, your name, where you're from, and what your question is. Keep it to 30 seconds to a minute preferably with 30-second side so we can keep the show going. But KP's question here, Josh, is about Benny Snell and, questioning. He also ran behind that rough defensive line. I do think Benny Snell took steps forward last year, but I think that the Steelers need to be in a position looking at him kind of like they're looking at Devin Bush. They can't bank on this. Now, Devin Bush is different because he's at a starting role at a major position. He's, Benny Snell's a backups part to Najee Harris, but I truly think Najee Harris backup is going to be an important job this upcoming season and for the next few years. I really think that they tried to bring in Kalen Ballage last year. We saw how that kind of worked, but I truly think a big part of this also needs to be some competition back there, because maybe Benny Snell does take the step forward with the offensive line, but if he doesn't, they need an ulterior plan here. But what's your read on Benny Snell and where he is in his career and how the Steelers should handle him moving forward?
Now, if I'm not mistaken, last week we talked about Matt Canada's offense and how everything else was going to be shifted around. Was that last week or 2 weeks ago? I know we had that discussion recently.
Yes.
Last week we talked about Matt Canada's offense and how things might look a little bit different. The one thing we did not talk about was Benny Snell. We did not mention how this could affect him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about when I heard the concept of how Benny Snell could possibly improve, I didn't think back to last season. I thought back to the 2020 season. 2020 season, there were 3 games when Benny Snell had at least 15 carries in a game. Two of those games, he averaged 4 yards a carry or better. And one, he averaged 3.75. The Steelers won 2 of those 3 games. Now, you don't think correlation affects causation? That's another discussion. But my point is this. There were times during that 2020 season when Benny Snell got opportunities and ran the ball well. What else happened in the earlier part of that 2020ty season? The Steelers are running a little bit more of a version of the Matt Canada offense that we're probably going to see this year. Then at one point, they kind of started going against the grain, and it looked more like what we had seen under Randy Fichtner and Todd Haley, because that's what Ben Roethlisberger was more comfortable doing. But we saw more glimpses of the Matt Canada offense in the early part of the 2020 season, and the team was running the ball pretty effectively for the most part during that time. And Benny Snell got 19 carries in week 1, averaged nearly 6 a carry. Steelers beat the Giants in that game. He ran the ball pretty well. I have been one of those people that have been of the belief that Matt Canada's offense suits Benny Snell because he's probably going to get a lot of carries out of the pistol. Benny Snell out of the pistol makes so much more sense to me than Benny Snell out of the shotgun. And some people are going to say, well, what's the difference? The quarterback's still away from the center. Here's the difference. In the shotgun, being off to the side of the quarterback is not as much opportunity for north-south running as you might see in the pistol, or being lined up behind the quarterback. You're going to get more opportunities for north-south, and I truly believe that's where Benny Snell is more effective. That's the thing that makes me feel better about it. Plus, being in the pistol, this is another reason why Matt Canada's offense is so important, because if you're running out of the pistol, you're running north-south, it's going to give you opportunities for play action that are going to be a lot more effective, not only as far as that north-south running game, but opportunities to throw the ball down the field, or this is also important, using the middle of the field, which is what this offense did not do as consistently in the past couple seasons. So now all of that becomes a factor in this offense again. It's almost like they were doors in the hallway that were locked and you didn't have access to them. Or I'll take it back. I'll show my age here for a second. Playing Legend of Zelda, and you might not have had a key to get inside a certain door. You had to go back and find that key to get inside that door. That's what this offense is going to feel like. Now you have all the keys now in Legend of Zelda. Now you can go through all the doors that you need to with Matt Canada's offense, and Benny Snell might be one of those guys that you find on the other side of that locked door. So keep that in mind when we're talking about Matt Canada's offense and what they're now capable of doing, because now not only does this help Najee Harris, of course, with the improved offensive line, or at least the perceived improved offensive line. It's just like the run defense, the offensive line, that figure can only get better by default. So there's that. But at the same time, as far as this scheme goes and how it gives better opportunities for guys like Benny Snell to do what he does and help the offense as a whole, taking shots downfield with play action, work in the middle of the field, and having a guy like Pat Freiermuth who just does not drop the ball inside the red zone, that is a very good addition to have, or a good change to have to this offense. And I think it helps everything going in.
You see how great minds think alike? If y'all remember, just yesterday, I did a whole episode about throwing down the middle part of the field and getting Pat Freiermuth worked into it and how the running game is going to be played off that. And guess what? I didn't talk about Benny Snell. but we're talking about trying to use that to figure things out. And that's what this man's talking about right here. Josh Taylor, I got to get used to pointing the right mirror direction, because he's like this way on my screen, but he's really this way if I'm on camera. So I got to get used to pointing that way when I'm talking to Josh Taylor. But
I used to try to do that on the nightly sports call, and I always I just gave up on it. I quit.
It's crazy, but I feel you on that, and that's a very important point. The running style of Benny Snell is a power, a north-south. I'm going to run you over. I'm going to build a momentum. I'm going to do that because Benny Snell's not huge, so he's not going to just have this natural, just like boom size to him. But he does have the ability to get going forward. Now, question is, should they go out and get another guy? Well, there's other guys like Justin Jackson who are available. Guys, Tariq Cohen's still out there. I think Tariq Cohen's a little smaller, and he also didn't play in 2021. But Justin Jackson's a guy who I think that at his size and his age, he's 6 foot, he's around 200. I can see the Steelers, being willing to work with that situation because he's 26 years old. I can definitely see them looking at a guy like that in this equation, because he's young, he's out of his first contract, he'd be inexpensive. You could bring him in, and if he works, great. If not, well, you took it. It's like you said, all those shots that Kevin Colbert's taken this year. It's an opportunity to be able to say, hey, let's get Najee Harris back. And here's the thing: I hear you on Benny Snell, and I think he could get better. I think he can become that guy. There's a potential for that. But I also think there's also a good potential that he doesn't get to that factor, and that doesn't work out for him. And the Steelers have to be prepared either way, because as much as Najee Harris will want the ball every single carry, you got to keep that man rested. You got to be able to split up his carries, and having another young running back to help balance that would be huge for it. That's why I think they do need to go get some help. But I don't disagree with you or KP, who says maybe he just needs a real chance.
Yeah, and it's. I'm glad you bring up Najee Harris wanting the ball, because we've seen this happen before, particularly in this organization. When you have a guy who's able to run the ball, who's able to catch the ball, who's able to take on a great volume, don't get me wrong, it's a wonderful thing to have. Mm-hmm. But sometimes you got to protect that guy from himself.
Yes,
you got to protect that guy from himself, because you might be able to give that guy a high volume, but you want to get a good volume of that guy for a longer period of time. And this is something that, we get back in that discussion about Le'Veon Bell. I know a lot of people consider him he who must not be named, but you got to talk about it from the running back position, because it's a relative discussion, and it's an important discussion. When you have a guy who's capable of producing that kind of volume, the natural instinct is to just feed that guy and just keep feeding him. And I understand that. But at the same time, you also have to keep the long-term picture in mind. So if you have a guy, even if that guy gets 5 to 6 carries a game or 7 to 8 a game, depending on who you're playing, you still want to have a guy to say, hey, you know what? Let's give Najee a quick blow. Let's get this guy in here for at least a snap or two, even if he's not even carrying the ball. Just get him in for a couple snaps, let Najee come back in. Maybe that's the thing that preserves and gives him some wind and preserves his legs a bit, because you don't want to have the kind of resource that you have in Najee Harris. And it's worth pointing out, the Steelers have now used their last 2 first-round picks on a running back and a quarterback. You don't want to have those resources and wear them out too soon. You want to have the things around them that protect them, and sometimes their usage is part of that formula also.
That's where I'm with you on that. And having that strong backfield, it's of a lot of importance. But again, that's why I think they should get another backup running back in there. People forget, in that 2008 run, that 8 run doesn't maybe happen without Whaley Moore. He came in. He had a really good spell game. I think over 100 yards against the Bengals in a really important game that season. He made some amazing plays in some key situations as a third down back. And
that game against Jacksonville too during that season.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, but that guy would come in the clutch. You need a guy like that who maybe isn't a star, but is a solid, hard worker, dude who will take what he can get. And when he's ready, he's ready. When his time is up to bat, he's ready to come to the plate and swing and get contact and keep things moving for your team. So again, Benny Snell, not out of the mix, but the Steelers should look to add and say, hey, Benny, if you believe in yourself, you're going to be able to beat this competition. Do not be afraid of competition. Run towards it and prove yourself. So, KP, great question. Remember, if you want to be on the show, do call into the show. We appreciate anyone who does this. 412-223-6644 if you want to get on the show. And again, you can call at any point in time. You'll just get a voicemail, but leave your name, where you're from, and your question. Keep it as short as possible so that we can get you on the show. Josh, thanks so much for joining us here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Josh Taylor HD on social media. That's the easiest place to find me. As far as everything else I'm doing, CBS Pittsburgh, as far as online is concerned, that's where you can find me as far as the TV side of things, radio side of things, 93.7 The Fan. The easiest place is actually a place where you can also find the Locked On Steelers podcast. Use the Odyssey app. Listen to both in the same shot. You can fill your day up. You're good to go. Usually weekend mornings, more primarily Sunday mornings. Not coming up. Actually, I will be back on the 15th of May.
There you go.
Sunday morning at 7 a.m. Little hiatus there, but I'll be back up to doing that as well. So that's the easiest place to look.
Absolutely. Do check Josh out. He does great work. That's why we love having him here. He has so many great points. And
plus, I have Chris too on the radio show.
Yes, he does. He does bring me on. And see, you did the same thing. You pointed that way. See, I did it right there.
This is why I quit, and now I made the same mistake again. See, I follow your first mind.
It's all right. It's all right. We have this. We all have all the same problems. But yes, do check him out. He has me on 93.7 The Fan as well. Thanks so much, Josh, for being here, and thank you, dear listeners and viewers, for you being here. We appreciate all of our people that check us out, and all the people that give us 5-star ratings with positive comments on Apple Podcasts. We also appreciate everyone who gives us likes, subscribe to our YouTube channel to boost that following. All those things really help us out. Remember, if you're enjoying us on YouTube, but you need to listen to us, we're on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, anywhere audio platforms are at, we're at too. So do check us out there. Check out our YouTube channel and stay tuned. We got a lot more coming this week. We got Brian Bacco, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, talking tomorrow for the Wednesday episode. It's going to be a fun one. Thanks again for checking us out. Stay tuned. We got more coming your way on your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.